And we're live. Welcome, everybody, here to the Lakers Lowdown podcast. I'm Anthony. You know what? This should have been a lounge, too. I did a lowdown yesterday on the 4th of July. I'm doing a lowdown right now on the Friday after a 4th of July. I should be holding a beer right now. You should be holding a beer right now. We should all be on vacation. Nobody should be working. We shouldn't have to be sitting here wondering what the Lakers are going to do. And yet, here we are. How fun is this, everybody? Today on the show, we're going to be talking about the offseason that the Lakers are having, an update there. We're going to talk about a player who I think has become underrated, in large part because of his contract, but still somebody who I think we should be talking a little bit more seriously about. And then I did get like a quick note on the LeBron contract and the 1+1. I reacted a certain way because of one potential outcome to it. But I was sent a note about another potential reaction to it, especially from the Lakers perspective. So I'm going to talk a little bit about LeBron's contract. And then here at the end of it, because this is a live show, we will go ahead and answer some of your questions from the live audience. A quick reminder, please do hit that subscribe button if you guys are watching live on YouTube right now. If you guys are watching live on Twitter, please head on over to youtube.com/@LakersLounge to keep that thing growing there. We just crossed 4,000 subscribers. I like multiples of 5, and I like bigger numbers as well. So let's keep that growing. If you guys are listening to this in the form of a podcast, please do hit that subscribe button everywhere that you get your pods, specifically Odyssey. So the normal policy applies here. This is going to be your typical kind of lounge happy hour. And then as we head into the weekend and as we get a little bit more information, I will go live whenever we get some breaking news. But as it stands right now, as I'll explain a little bit later in the show, I don't anticipate a whole bunch of breaking news. So take that for what you will. All right, so I'm going to start with the latest, because I think that's what people are most interested in. And did some, I was driving around a whole bunch today, so was making calls, and calls aren't as efficient as getting to send emails and texts and DMs and stuff like that. But from what I can tell, the status of the market is pretty stagnant right now. The Lakers have been trying to make deals. They have been making calls kind of nonstop throughout the last couple weeks or so. But they have run into snags kind of all over the league where the Lakers, especially with draft compensation, the Lakers aren't all that interested in sending out first round picks for the likes of Dorian Finney-Smith or Cam Johnson, or I think they'd be more open to it with Kuz. I think they'd be open to sending out a pick for Jeremy Grant, but I don't get the sense that they're willing to go above and beyond on those kinds of players. And that is where a lot of these talks have just kind of stalled out. The other problem that they're having is with D'Angelo Russell. Essentially, the issue with D'Lo is, one, he was really productive for them last year. And if you trade D'Lo, you now have to also replace his production whenever you send him out. So there's one thing. Two, he is still going to be a very productive player basically anywhere he goes. So if you're a team that, say, is interested in losing a whole bunch, D'Lo is almost like too talented to make it so that you lose the necessary 60 games in a season. He's a good starting point guard in the NBA in the regular season. And yet the problem also with him is that he also isn't good enough for anybody to be over the moon about trading for. So he's in that weird kind of tweener spot in terms of players go. Yes, he has that expiring salary. And yes, that would become more valuable at the deadline. But as it stands right now, as the Lakers are trying to do whatever work they can going into the season, the issue that they're running into is kind of the starting point in their conversation there. Portland doesn't want D'Angelo Russell. They have a whole bunch of guards anyway. And you could say, well, just find a third team for D'Angelo Russell. Well, you're going to run into the same problem because there just aren't very many teams that don't have young point guards that they don't want to develop. And there are too many teams out there that, are convinced that they can actually compete this year. So there are fewer tanking teams. And even if you are a tanking team, D'Angelo Russell isn't like all that conducive to a tank. So that's the starting point of the issue here. Now you could, I guess, take D'Lo out of the equation for, say, Portland, and you could send Rui and Jared Vanderbilt plus draft compensation for Jeremy Grant, who I think is obviously a better player than both Gabe and Vando. But like, do you want to send out two either starting or near starting salary or starting caliber wings plus 2 first-round picks for a Jeremy Grant that you're not all that sure is going to buy into doing the little things that he did, say, in OKC or in Dallas, that he's been able to live very, very well while not having to care about those things in Detroit and in Portland. And if you do bring in Jeremy Grant and he doesn't want to do those small things, or he isn't good at those small things anymore, now you've traded 2 first-round picks away for him. You've traded 2 wings away for him who would make up for the small things that, like in Vando's case, if you trade Vando and you bring in Grant, you potentially have made yourself even worse at those little things that the Lakers needed to get better at this offseason. And that's what they're running into there. If you trade, say, let's see, in Brooklyn, it's been very clear that they're interested in bringing back D'Angelo Russell. They liked having him there. They had a very good run together. So that at least is like a decent starting spot. But for Sean Marks, his phones have been so busy for all of his players, and everybody is asking him to sell off his pieces at such discount prices that he's just kind of locked himself in a shell and said, you know what? Come back to me when you're more serious about this stuff. The issue, though, is that what Sean Marks finds serious, other teams, i.e. Rob Pelinka, doesn't think is all that serious. Asking for a first-round pick for Dorian Finney-Smith, asking for like legitimate draft compensation for Cam Johnson, who hasn't been able to stay healthy, has taken a step back since what we saw from him in Phoenix. Like, there are roadblocks there. And also, like, I feel like I need to say this too. I haven't seen a come across my desk here that I would say, I'm angry that the Lakers haven't made. Like, there hasn't been. I would like for the Lakers to make a trade. I would like for them to upgrade their roster. I don't want D'Angelo Russell to start the year on the team, because you now start the season with the understanding that you have to do stuff in or something in the regular season. And I think that's been a mistake that Rob Pelinka has made a few times over. So I get the frustration here from fans who are like, well, what the hell? I think if you aren't going to make a big move, I think it makes sense to try to find a cap team that is willing to take on your minimum salary so that you could at the very least improve your roster with, guys who have been squeezed out of the market. There are free agents available right now who I would say are improvements over the guys that the Lakers currently have on veteran minimum deals. And the Lakers can't have conversations with them because they have too many roster spots taken. And I think, the focus with it being, the big move and all that you want to make is the big move has actually kind of detracted from potential improvements on the margins. And I think that's like the actual fairest criticism of the offseason to this point. So I don't know. I understand where people are coming from, where they say, what the hell? Why aren't you doing anything for Jeremy Grant? Why aren't you doing anything for Brooklyn's wings? Why aren't you doing anything for Bruce Brown? Bruce Brown's a funny one because everybody, like nobody actually thinks Bruce Brown is actually worth a first round pick around the league. Masai Ujiri has convinced himself that is the case. And the Lakers, Masai and Rob love to call each other, they love to stare into each other's eyes and see who blinks. But they just don't wind up making deals with each other because they're both too stubborn to make a deal if it feels like they didn't win it. So, like, for a lot of these things, as GMs and presidents and vice presidents of basketball operations have become more of these kind of like forward facing figures in the NBA, all of them are very reluctant to make any deal that doesn't, that they don't get widely lauded for. I think that's really kind of held up the market. The other factor here, and what's really held up the market, is nobody has any idea what the hell any of this new CBA stuff means. Can't stack veteran minimums. You can't, if you're above the first apron somehow, you can't send out less money than you bring back. That's something that the Lakers are running into with Zach LaVine. There's just all, if you're above the second apron, you can't even name your firstborn son because you don't have the freedom to do so. Like, this new CBA has wreaked absolute havoc across what everybody is trying to do. And I'm also the person who says, I don't care, Rob, figure it out. That's your job. And I think fans who feel that way, honestly, fair, because it's true. Rob, you get paid a whole bunch of money. You need to figure out a way to get something done this offseason beyond picking up the $20 bill that fell to you in Dalton Connect and using, like, if you knew that the trade market was going to be this difficult, why wouldn't you buy a second round pick? Like, the two-way players that the Lakers walked away from are fine, but like, if you knew that you were going to run into these issues here, like, why not buy a second round pick and give your scouting department an extra bite at the apple? Like, it's just, there are criticisms that I do have of the way that this has all gone down. But I also think, while I criticize, we also have to be somewhat realistic, because everybody in the NBA, well, the vast majority of teams in the NBA have been suffering paralysis by analysis here, as everybody is waiting to see what this new CBA is going to do to those teams that are willing to operate above the second apron. They're going to see what it does to teams that are willing to operate over the first apron. Is it really that much? Does it really behoove teams to try to get under the first apron so that they don't have to worry about any of the limitations that the aprons are putting on teams? And I just, as everybody waits for that to happen, and while everybody waits for everybody to get to Vegas to be able to talk these things through, everybody's just kind of stuck. And from my reading of the situation right now, the Lakers are still trying to make improvements. They have some time to be able to make some of those improvements. But as it stands right now, I would say Kuz is probably the likeliest name that gets moved. And from there, it kind of feels like the next likeliest situation is one that our friend Harrison is way too familiar with.
Run it back! Run it back! Run it back! Run it back! Run it back!
That feels a lot less fun than they're having in that video. I do have another quick note here on the new CBA. I know I'm on the record saying I hate it. I know I'm on the record here. Like, from my selfish perspective, this new CBA makes no sense. It's really, really stupid. From the player's perspective, it's really, really stupid. From agents' perspective, they freaking hate this thing too. Nobody likes this new CBA except for the owners, who get to, like, excuse themselves from spending money. But I think one really important factor here in like the impact of this new CBA, where I think the owners were penny wise, dollar dumb, is, like, for a long time, yeah, like, transactions could be kind of complicated, the whole matching salary thing, and and pick compensation and guarantees on contracts, all of that stuff. It was fairly complicated, but for the most part, you could hop on a trade machine and it was easy-ish to pull off a trade. It was easy-ish to start a conversation online about a hypothetical trade. But because of this new CBA, like, unless you were an absolute cap nut, unless you were willing to sit down and read clause after clause after clause after clause, or Google or search out other cap experts so that you could see if maybe, just maybe, they touched on the one thing that will help you figure out a way to make a trade. Like, basically nobody gets to participate in this aspect of the conversation around the NBA. And maybe it's a good thing. Maybe eventually, like, it'll be good to get back to like having fewer internet GMs and the focus becomes about basketball. But for right now, it's just such a drastic shift to where, like, it used to be you would hop on there and you would see all kinds of fake trades that would be getting quote tweeted into oblivion and people would laugh at or people would seriously consider, and you would be able to, like, it would kind of carry some of those down periods in the NBA offseason. But now, because basically nobody can participate in it, we're all just kind of sitting here yelling at each other because we're all frustrated about the fact that none of our teams are willing or able to do anything. And it just, the new CBA, like, it's not popular with fans. It's not popular with players, not popular with executives, not popular with agents. Literally, the only people who are happy about this new CBA are owners. And I just don't think, especially given like how people feel about billionaires in existing, that like anything that the only people who seem to benefit happen to be those billionaires. It just doesn't sit well. It just doesn't. And that's exactly how this new CBA feels for everybody who are trying to operate in it. All right, ranting and raving set aside now, I'm going to go ahead and, make the case for Zach LaVine. And I'm going to start by talking about Zach LaVine, the basketball player. He's still an incredible athlete. He can still shoot the absolute shit out of the basketball. He is still one of the league's most exciting players when he really has it going. He still doesn't defend worth a lick. Not quite the initiator, not the facilitator you would like for somebody who makes the amount of money that Zach LaVine makes. And it is just impossible to have a conversation about Zach LaVine without factoring in he has quite possibly the worst contract in the sport. I did some asking around about like whether or not the Bulls would actually be willing to trade a first rounder to get off of Zach LaVine, like strictly to get off of Zach LaVine. And I was met with some skepticism. Essentially, if they do move a first rounder to get off of Zach LaVine, they would want something of value back, right? They would want some draft compensation potentially. And maybe they throw in a first rounder, the Lakers throw in a couple second rounders, and then they get, and plus all of the contracts that you need to send out to get Zach LaVine back. But if you can acquire somebody who would be the best player in the trade, will likely continue to be the best player in that trade over the course of his contract here. This isn't a Russell Westbrook was aging at the time kind of situation. LaVine is still going to be a very productive player for the next 3 years. On top of that, starting next year, the cap is going to start jumping in increments of 10% for the next couple years. So you're going to feel that contract quite a bit this year. And then next year, you're going to feel it a little bit less because the cap is going to jump 10%. And then the year after that, compared to, this year, the cap will have jumped 20%. And at that point, that contract becomes a lot less cumbersome for what you're trying to do to build out the rest of your roster. So if you're the Lakers and you can get Zach LaVine for, I have right now the trade being D'Angelo Russell, Rui, and Gabe, that adds up to $46.7 million. And if you have to send out an extra, say, second rounder and you can get Zach LaVine back at $43 million per year, I think you got to consider it. I really, really do. It opens up potential trade options at the deadline. We do know that Rob Pelinka likes to have at least one first rounder in his back pocket at all times. This would allow you to be able to move 2 first rounders while maintaining an extra first in your pocket. I think that's some of the benefit there. Because those 3 contracts in Rui, D'Lo, and Gabe. If you send out those 3 contracts, they add up to $46.7 million. LaVine makes about $43 million this year, like a few pennies over $43 million this upcoming year. So because you wouldn't need to stack veteran minimum contracts in order to trade, to stack up, to add up to a player's contract, you could actually send out multiple veteran minimums in this deal. So if you want to get off Hayes, and if you want to get off Wood, or if you want to get off Cam Reddish, you could do that, and you could successfully open up roster spots that way too. Making this trade would also open you up to be able to use the 5.2 taxpayer mid-level exception, depending on how much contract you send out and how much you bring back in. If you want to fill Gabe's role with, the backup point guard thing, you could trade for, say, Javon Carter, who is a defensive-minded, kind of steady, doesn't shoot the ball all that well, but would be a fine backup point guard, especially if your other guards are Austin and LaVine. He would provide you some perimeter defense. I think it's something that you would really have to consider. And if that is the trade, if that's the way that you go here, you could go, your starting lineup next year would be LaVine, Austin. I would start Vando with Braun and AD. Because you have LaVine and Austin in your backcourt, and if Braun shoots the way that he did last year, you could get away with having Vando as a non-floor spacer in that starting lineup. If you do acquire Javon Carter here, he would be your backup. You would have Dalton Connect as your backup too, or I guess you would have Max Christie as your backup too. You would also have Dalton Connect coming off of your bench. And then you would round out the rest of your roster with Jalen Hood-Schifino and Bronny James, depending on which of the minimums that you move here. The other free agents that are on the board, you have guys at the point guard spot like Kyle Lowry. Tyus Jones isn't really on the board because the Lakers just can't afford him. There's just no world in which the Lakers would be able to acquire him. But you do have Markelle Fultz. You do still have Spencer Dinwiddie out there. You do have Denny Smith Jr. At shooting guard, you do have Gary Trent Jr. This is hat tip to Brett Siegel of Clutch Points. You do have Gary Trent Jr. You have Malik Beasley, Luke Kennard, Isaac Okoro. You have Lonnie Walker still out there on the free agent market at the 2. Small forward, DeMar DeRozan is still technically out there, but he's not in the Lakers' price range. You could say the same thing probably about Caleb Martin. Gordon Hayward, I think you might be able to get at the taxpayer mid-level exception. Maybe. Sadiq Bey also out there. I just refuse to acknowledge Miles Bridges' existence, but if that's something that you're interested in, do you, the Clippers. At power forward, if you want some depth there, you could get Precious Achiuwa. Robert Covington is out there. Dario Saric. Markieff Morris, I believe, is expected to sign with Philly. And then that kind of rounds out that. And then you have Daniel Tice. You have Cody Zeller, JaVale McGee, Tristan Thompson, and Bismack Biyombo on a very thin center market. So given how thin the center market, might make sense for the Lakers to keep one of Wood or Hayes. But yeah, I think with everything that the Lakers have going on here, I think it makes a lot more sense to get draft capital back, bring a high upside player in like Zach LaVine. I think it makes more sense to do that than it makes sense to spend draft capital to bring in a player like Jeremy Grant, who you also have questions about, bring in a player like Cam Johnson or Dorian Finney-Smith, who you also have questions about. Dorian Finney-Smith doesn't provide much of the 3 part and the 3 and D part. I think he's a marginal upgrade over Jared Vanderbilt. If you, I think you could say the same thing about Cam Johnson, that he's like a marginal upgrade over Rui Hachimura. And like, do you want to expend a first round pick on what would essentially be a marginal upgrade? I don't know. I wouldn't. I'm more open to, I think Kuz is a legitimate upgrade over both of the wings that the Lakers currently have right now. He is somebody who I'd be open to moving a first round pick for, maybe a second or two beyond that as well. But those are that, he's the only guy whose name that's come up that I'm like, okay, I could kind of see it. And even there, you have questions there too, because he's probably more of a 4 at this stage of his career. And LeBron is definitely a 4 at this stage of his career. So that's kind of the issue that you run into there. I don't know. I'm really curious what people think on the Zach LaVine front, because depending on how real the first round pick thing is with Zach LaVine, and I was met again with a little bit of skepticism when I spoke to league sources on kind of that front, that people are like, yeah, maybe they move a first round pick, but they would probably want something back beyond just cap filler, and if that is the case, the Lakers just don't have much of that kind of stuff. So maybe you throw in a couple second rounders and you turn a couple second rounders and a bunch of salary money into LaVine and a first rounder. I don't know, man. Like it's hard for me to not think that that's a path that the Lakers should really consider at a time where they're talking, by the way, about how they need to, start developing players and give themselves more draft capital and give their scouting department more opportunities to draft and develop young players. If that is your focus, and you could go out and get the best player in a trade and bring in a first round pick, that to me is like, it just seems to make the most sense in terms of appeasing everybody, right? If you trade for Zach LaVine, he's a clutch guy. You appease LeBron there, and you could say he's the all-star talent that, say, LeBron would have wanted. The other, on the draft and development side of things, you're getting an extra first-round pick, and for the fan base, maybe he's just kind of the necessary change that like allows you to head into season with a different taste in your mouth. But like, all things considered, I don't know. I think he probably checks the most boxes, but I also think that says a lot about the trade market as it currently exists. All right, so I'm recording right now. It is 5:12 my time, 3:12 back home on the West Coast. I have 2,600 people watching here. A reminder, please do hit that subscribe button. If you are watching live on Twitter, please head on over to youtube.com/@LakersLounge to help growing the show here. One thing to keep in mind as it pertains to Zach LaVine and as it pertains to this offseason in general. When LeBron signed or agreed to his new contract, it's a 1-in-1 type contract that gives him a no trade clause and allows him to re-enter the free agency market next year when the cap goes up by 10%. So at the very least, LeBron, I asked around, the Lakers are still adamant. They're like, LeBron James will not play for the people that the Lakers are not saying this on the record, obviously, because they don't want to, I think, put words in LeBron's mouth. But the people that I've spoken to who were close to the Lakers there have maintained 100% confidence that LeBron James is going to retire in a Lakers uniform. And one thing that somebody told me that I think is has really stuck with me over the last, 24, 48 hours or so, is that, yes, LeBron taking his contract this year, getting as much as he can this year, does kind of limit what they're able to do on the for the rest of the offseason from here on out. But if he does opt out, which I would say most people anticipate he's probably going to do after the season, if he does opt out of this next trade, this next season, and you go into next offseason with a better free agency class than existed this year around, and people are more kind of accustomed to existing in Rob Pelinka's apron world, if he was open to a pay cut this year, why wouldn't he be open to a pay cut next year? And if he is open to a pay cut next year, like, yeah, he could technically go and he could play somewhere else and he could chase a championship somewhere else. But if he does that, then he would be leaving Bronny James in LA. And I don't think he's going to do that. And so if LeBron was really open to a pay cut this year, and he's willing to potentially take one next year with a more loaded free agency class, wouldn't his top priority probably be winning a championship with his son? Like not just playing with his son, which sets its own history in its own right, but also like potentially next year, if he takes a big enough of a pay cut and it gives the Lakers enough financial flexibility that they could bring in the kind of player that elevates the Lakers to, championship contender single-handedly, wouldn't his top priority be winning a championship alongside his son? And that was something that, that like, I think the Lakers, I think they're kind of reluctant to put it out into the universe, but I think it's part of the math that they're doing on this year's offseason is that, and look, it might just be Lucy puts the football down, Charlie Brown gets all reared up to give it one last try to kick that damn football. And maybe this is kicking the can down the line by offering up some fake optimism, some copium, if you prefer that word. But this is the rare copium that made me kind of wonder about it, because him potentially being open to a pay cut this year, yes, I think it was a PR masterstroke, but I asked around, and when I asked around, the people that I spoke to said, like, yeah, we actually think that he was willing to do that. And if he was willing to do it this year, where like the top of the free agency market was a washed up Klay Thompson, well, what would he be willing to do next year when that free agency class gets quite a bit better? And I don't know. I think it's worth talking about here on the show. And I think it's worth kind of factoring into the math on whether or not it makes sense to maintain a little bit more flexibility for next year in the event that he is more open to a pay cut, to give it one last go at winning a championship with his son before he rides off into that Santa Monica sunset. I don't know. I think it's I let me know what you think. I'm legitimately curious what everybody thinks about that one. All right, I'm going to scroll through here and see if we have any starred comments before we get out of here. And I have to take the family out for dinner. It turns out children get hungry at the same hours. Like, it's funny how much children wind up just or old people wind up just becoming children again, because they eat meals at the same time. You have to change their diapers. Like, it's just, you're not very comfortable watching them walk on their own. You don't want to leave them in rooms by themselves. Like, it's crazy how much toddlers and very, very old people have in common. But it is 5:18 my time, and I got to get my family out to dinner. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this here. And if anything breaking happens, I will jump right back on the air. But a nice short Friday lowdown / lounge to send you off into what I hope is a very fun and safe continuation of the holiday weekend, to those of you lucky enough to still be on your holiday right now. And until the next time you guys talk, or we all talk here again, I'm Anthony Irwin saying have a great rest of your day, make somebody else's, and I will talk to you tomorrow.